In the tranquil gardens of Cranlaw Hall, a deadly secret lies buried beneath the earth. A young archaeologist is found dead, his skull shattered, a cryptic note in his pocket. 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10. Was it greed, ambition, or a hidden scandal that drove someone to murder? Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a mind sharper than a blade, unraveling a web of lies among a cast of suspects, each with motives as deep as the dig itself. Who struck the fatal blow? And what treasure, real or forged, sparked this deadly disaster? In just 15 chapters, secrets will unravel, and the truth will shock. Will you guess the killer before Miss Marple's little gray cells reveal all? Chapter 1. The quiet of Cranlaw Hall. Late summer sun cast long, golden fingers across the manicured lawns of Cranlaw Hall, a sprawling Georgian estate nestled in the heart of the Dorset countryside. The air was thick with the scent of roses and freshly turned earth, for the estate's gardens were undergoing an ambitious archaeological dig, spearheaded by the enthusiastic Lord Percival Cranlaw. The dig, a quest to unearth a rumored Saxon burial mound, had drawn a curious assortment of guests to the hall: scholars, dilettantes, and local gentry, all buzzing with anticipation beneath the veneer of polite society. Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and unassuming air, sat quietly in the shade of a yew tree, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. She had been invited to Cranlaw Hall by her old friend, Lady Beatrice Cranlaw, who had insisted that a week in the country would do wonders for Miss Marple's spirits. Besides, Lady Beatrice had written in her looping hand, "You'll find the company most diverting. Percival's dig is the talk of the county." Miss Marple, ever observant, suspected there was more to the invitation than mere diversion. Lady Beatrice's letters had hinted at unease, a certain strain in the household that went beyond the usual tensions of hosting. The guests had gathered on the terrace for afternoon tea, their voices mingling with the clink of porcelain and the distant clatter of shovels from the dig site. Lord Percival, a weary man with a booming voice and an almost boyish enthusiasm for history, held court at the center of the group. His wife, Lady Beatrice, presided over the tea tray with her usual grace, though Miss Marple noted the faint tightness about her mouth. The other guests included Dr. Evelyn Harper, a formidable archaeologist with a penchant for sharp retorts, Mr. Roland Vance, a charming but suspiciously smooth financier, who seemed overly interested in the dig's funding, Mrs. Clara Vance, his nervous, bird-like wife, who clutched her teacup as if it were a lifeline, and Captain Hugh Ramsay, a retired military man whose brusque manner did little to conceal his keen observation of the group. Rounding out the party was Miss Lydia Trent, a young novelist with a penchant for melodrama, and Mr. Thomas Blake, the estate's dour groundskeeper, who hovered at the edges of the gathering, his eyes fixed on the dig site. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on each guest, her mind cataloging their gestures, their words, their silences. She noted the way Dr. Harper's fingers tightened around her teaspoon when Lord Percival mentioned a significant find expected soon. She observed Mr. Vance's too quick smile as he deflected a question about his recent business ventures, and she saw the fleeting glance Mrs. Vance cast toward Captain Ramsay, a glance heavy with something unspoken fear, perhaps, or guilt. "It's quite the undertaking, isn't it, Miss Marple?" Lady Beatrice said, settling beside her friend with a cup of Earl Grey. "Percival's convinced we'll uncover something extraordinary, a king's ransom in artifacts, he says." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Extraordinary things, my dear Beatrice, often bring extraordinary troubles. People are rarely as composed as they seem when treasure is at stake." Lady Beatrice gave a small, nervous laugh. Oh, Jane, you do have a way of seeing through to the heart of things. I confess, I've been uneasy. Percival's been so secretive about the dig. And the guests. Well, they're not all as harmonious as one might hope. Before Miss Marple could press further, a shout from the dig site shattered the afternoon's calm. The guests turned as one, their teacups forgotten. Thomas Blake, the groundskeeper, was running toward the terrace, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "My lord," he gasped, reaching Lord Percival. It's Dr. Harper's assistant, Mr. Gilmore. He's been found dead in the trench." A collective gasp rose from the group. Miss Lydia Trent let out a theatrical sob, while Mr. Vance's hand froze mid-gesture, his teacup tilting dangerously. Captain Ramsay stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone terrace. Lady Beatrice clutched Miss Marple's arm, her eyes wide with shock. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression calm but her mind already turning. "Dead, you say?" she murmured, her voice soft but piercing. "How very unfortunate, and how very curious." As the guests erupted into a flurry of questions and exclamations, Miss Marple's gaze swept the terrace once more. A death at Cranlaw Hall, in the midst of an archaeological dig. With such a varied cast of characters, this was no mere accident, she felt certain. The little gray cells, as she might have described them, were already at work, piecing together the first threads of what promised to be a most intricate tapestry of deceit. Chapter 2. The body in the trench sun had dipped below the horizon, casting Cranlaw Hall in a somber twilight as the guests gathered in the drawing room, their faces pale and strained. The news of Mr. Arthur Gilmore's death had spread like wildfire, igniting whispers and sit-along glances. The young assistant archaeologist, a quiet man with a scholarly stoop and wire-rimmed spectacles, had been found sprawled in the muddy trench of the dig site, a deep wound at the base of his skull. The local constable, a nervous young man named P.C. Harrow, had arrived promptly, but his flustered manner suggested he was ill-equipped for a case of this magnitude. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a high-backed armchair near the fireplace, her knitting needles resuming their steady rhythm. Her eyes, however, were far from idle, darting from one guest to another, noting the tension in their postures, the flickers of unease in their expressions. Lord Percival paced before the hearth, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by a grim determination to maintain order. Lady Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, poured tea with trembling hands, her gaze flickering toward her husband as if seeking reassurance. "It's a dreadful business," Lord Percival said, his voice strained. "Poor Gilmore. He was so dedicated to the dig, a fine scholar," Dr. Harper said. "Who could have done such a thing?" Dr. Evelyn Harper, seated stiffly on a velvet settee, bristled at the mention of her name. "Arthur was meticulous," she said sharply. "He'd never have been careless enough to fall and hit his head. If that's what the constable is implying, that wound was no accident." P.C. Harrow, hovering near the doorway, cleared his throat. "We're not implying anything yet, ma'am. The coroner will examine the body. But, well, the wound does suggest foul play. I've sent for Inspector Japp from Scotland Yard. He'll be here by morning." Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. "Foul play, you say?" she murmured, her tone deceptively mild. "And at what time, pray, was Mr. Gilmore found?" Thomas Blake, the groundskeeper, stepped forward, his cap twisted in his hands. "It was just past 4, mum. I was checking the trenches before supper, as I always do. Found him lying there, near the eastern edge of the dig." The spade was still in his hand, but there was blood, and his head was at an odd angle. A spade, Miss Marple repeated softly, her mind filing away the detail. And was anyone else at the dig site at the time? Blake hesitated, his eyes darting toward the guests. Not that I saw, ma'am. Most everyone was up here for tea. But the site's open enough someone could have slipped down and back without being noticed. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mr. Roland Vance, lounging against the mantelpiece with a studied air of nonchalance, broke it with a dry chuckle. Come now, surely this is some tragic mishap. Gilmore was always poking about in those trenches alone. Perhaps a stone fell, or he tripped. Mrs. Clara Vance, seated beside her husband, flinched at his words. Roland, don't be so callous, she whispered, her voice trembling. A man is dead. Captain Hugh Ramsay, standing near the window, turned sharply. Mishap or not, Vance, it's a damned queer business. Gilmore was no fool. If someone struck him, they had a reason. Miss Lydia Trent, the novelist, clutched a handkerchief to her lips, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. It's like something out of one of my stories, she said faintly. A murder, here at Cranlaw Hall. Oh, it's too dreadful. Miss Marple's lips twitched faintly, though her expression remained serene. Dreadful, indeed, Miss Trent, she said. But in my experience, truth is often stranger and far more precise than fiction. Tell me, Mr. Blake, was Mr. Gilmore's spade damaged in any way? Blake frowned, caught off guard by the question. Damaged? No, ma'am. It looked fine. Just a bit of dirt on it, as you'd expect. And the ground around him? Miss Marple pressed, her voice gentle but insistent. Was it disturbed, as if there had been a struggle? Blake hesitated again, his brow furrowing. Now that you mention it, the earth was a bit churned up, more than usual. But I thought it was just from the digging. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. Thank you, Mr. Blake. Every detail, however small, is of consequence. Lady Beatrice, her composure fraying, set down her teapot with a clatter. Jane, surely you don't think one of us could have done this? We were all here, at tea, when it happened. Were we, my dear Beatrice? Miss Marple said softly, her eyes sweeping the room. I recall Mr. Vance stepping away briefly to take a telephone call. And Captain Ramsay was late to tea, was he not? And Miss Trent, you were admiring the roses near the dig site earlier, I believe. The accused trio stiffened, their faces a study in varied emotions: indignation from Vance, defiance from Ramsay, and a flush of guilt from Miss Trent. I was only there for a moment, Miss Trent protested. I wanted inspiration for my novel. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing but her eyes sharp. But it is curious, is it not? How many of us had reason to be near the dig site today? The room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. P.C. Harrow, clearly out of his depth, scribbled furiously in his notebook. I'll need statements from everyone, he said. Where you were between 3 and 4 this afternoon, if you please. As the guests began to murmur their alibis, Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her mind already sifting through the fragments of information. A young man dead, a wound to the head, a spade in hand, and a circle of suspects, each with their own secrets. The little gray cells were humming, and Miss Marple knew that the truth, however deeply buried, would soon be unearthed. Chapter 3. The arrival of Miss Marple's inside the morning after Mr. Gilmore's death. Dawned gray and heavy, with a mist clinging to the lawns of Cranlaw Hall like a shroud. The household was subdued, the usual bustle of servants and guests replaced by a tense quiet. Breakfast was a strained affair, with the guests picking at their food and exchanging furtive glances. Miss Jane Marple, however, appeared unruffled, her knitting neatly folded in her lap as she sipped her tea, and observed the room with her usual keen attention. Inspector Japp arrived promptly at 9, his brisk manner and neatly trimmed mustache a stark contrast to P.C. Harrow's nervous fumbling. He was a man of action, but Miss Marple knew him to be thorough, if occasionally prone to overlooking the subtler nuances of human behavior. She had worked with him before, and while he respected her insight, he was not above a touch of exasperation at her unorthodox methods. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Japp said, spotting her in the corner of the dining room. "I might have known you'd be tangled up in this business. A nasty one, by all accounts. Blunt force to the head. No question of murder." "The coroner's report confirms it." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes bright with interest. "Indeed, Inspector, a most unfortunate event. Have you seen the body yourself?" Japp nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "I have." Gilmore was struck from behind with considerable force. The wound suggests a heavy, flat object, possibly the spade found in his hand, though it's clean of blood. Odd, that. We're testing it for traces, but it's been handled too much to be certain. Curious, Miss Marple murmured, her fingers twitching as if itching for her needles. A clean spade, yet the ground was disturbed. And the time of death, between 3 and 4 yesterday afternoon, according to the coroner, fits with Blake's discovery at 4. Now, I'll need to interview everyone, but I'd value your thoughts, Miss Marple. You've a knack for seeing what others miss. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. You are too kind, Inspector. I am merely an observer of human nature, but I should like to visit the dig site, if I may. The scene of a crime often speaks louder than its witnesses. Japp raised an eyebrow but nodded. Right, then. Let's have a look. The site's been cordoned off, but you'll see it as it was. The dig site, a short walk from the hall, was a patchwork of trenches and mounds, marked by stakes and string. The eastern trench, where Gilmore had been found, was a shallow pit, its edges crumbling slightly from recent rain. Miss Marple stood at the edge, her eyes scanning the ground with a precision that belied her frail appearance. Japp pointed to the spot where Gilmore's body had lain, now marked by a chalk outline. Here's where he was, Japp said. Face down, spade in his right hand, blood pooling under his head. No footprints, thanks to the dry soil. But the ground was scuffed, as Blake said. Could be a struggle, or just Gilmore's work. Miss Marple crouched slightly, peering at the trench. And these tools? She asked, gesturing to a nearby pile of shovels and picks. Were they all accounted for? Japp frowned. I believe so. Blake said nothing was missing, but I'll have him check again. Why though? No reason, Miss Marple said airily, though her eyes lingered on a small trowel half buried in the dirt. It is only that tools, like people, have a way of telling stories. This trowel, for instance, its handle is worn smooth, yet the blade is sharp. Someone used it recently, and with care. Japp jotted a note, his expression skeptical but attentive. You think the trowel's significant. Everything is significant, Inspector, until it is not. Miss Marple replied. Tell me, did Mr. Gilmore have anything on his person? Papers, perhaps, or notes? Japp consulted his notebook. A pocketbook with a few shillings, a pencil, and a scrap of paper with some numbers, likely measurements for the dig. Nothing unusual. Dr. Harper said he was always scribbling notes. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. And the other guests? Have they provided their alibis? Japp sighed. They have, and it's a muddle. Lord Percival and Lady Beatrice were on the terrace with most of the others at tea. Vance claims he was on a telephone call in the library from 3 to 3:30, though the butler only vaguely recalls seeing him. Captain Ramsay says he was in his room, writing letters, but no one can confirm it. Miss Trent insists she was wandering the gardens, and Mrs. Vance says she was with her husband, though she's shaky on the timing. Dr. Harper was at the dig site until just before tea, but she claims she left Gilmore alone round 3. A muddle, indeed, Miss Marple said, her tone serene but her mind racing. And Mr. Blake says he was checking the estate's fences until he came to the dig site at 4. No one saw him, either. Everyone's got a gap in their story. Miss Marple. It's like trying to pin jelly to a wall. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Jelly, Inspector, can be pinned if one knows where to place the pins. I should like to speak with the guests myself, if you permit. People often reveal more than they intend when they think they are merely chatting. Japp chuckled. I know. Better than to say no to you, Miss Marple. Just don't go stirring up too much trouble before I get my bearings. Trouble, Inspector, Miss Marple said, her voice soft as silk. I assure you, I seek only the truth. As Japp strode off to organize his interviews, Miss Marple lingered at the trench, her gaze fixed on the trowel. A clean spade, a worn trowel, a disturbed patch of earth, and a circle of alibis that did not quite align. These were the threads of the puzzle, and Miss Marple's little gray cells were already weaving them into a pattern. The truth, she knew, lay not in the grand gestures but in the small, overlooked details, and she intended to find everyone. Chapter 4. The questions begin. Morning mist had burned away, leaving Cranlaw Hall bathed in pale sunlight that did little to lift the pall of suspicion hanging over the household. The drawing room, with its heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany, became the stage for Inspector Japp's interviews. Each guest summoned in turn to recount their movements on the fateful afternoon of Mr. Gilmore's death. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a corner with her knitting, was a silent observer, her sharp eyes missing nothing as the guests' stories unfolded. Inspector Japp, his notebook open and pencil poised, began with Lord Percival, who stood stiffly by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Now, Lord Cranlaw, Japp said, you were on the terrace for tea from 3 o'clock onward. Is that correct? Quite correct, Lord Percival replied, his voice clipped. Beatrice and I were hosting our guests. Gilmore was at the dig site, as usual. I didn't see him after luncheon. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. And you did not visit the dig site yourself, Lord Percival? She asked, her tone mild. Lord Percival's eyes flicked toward her, a touch of irritation in them. No, Miss Marple. I was with my guests. The dig is Dr. Harper's domain. She and Gilmore handled the work. Dr. Evelyn Harper, summoned next, sat with a ramrod-straight posture, her dark eyes flashing with barely concealed impatience. I left Arthur at the dig site around 3, she said. He was cataloging some pottery fragments. I came up to the terrace for tea, as everyone saw. Everyone, Miss Marple murmured, her voice almost lost in the rustle of her knitting. I recall you arrived a few minutes after 3, Dr. Harper. Did you walk directly from the dig site? Dr. Harper's jaw tightened. I stopped to wash my hands in the scullery. Field work is dirty. Miss Marple. I joined the others shortly after. Jap scribbled a note. And you saw no one else at the dig site when you left Gilmore? No one, Dr. Harper said firmly. Arthur was alone. Miss Marple's needles paused. And yet, Dr. Harper, you mentioned Mr. Gilmore was cataloging fragments. Were these fragments of particular value? Perhaps. Dr. Harper hesitated, her fingers twitching slightly. They were promising. Arthur thought we might be close to a significant find, a Saxon brooch, perhaps, or a ceremonial dagger. But nothing was confirmed. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind cataloging the slight tremor in Dr. Harper's voice. Next came Mr. Roland Vance, whose easy charm seemed strained as he leaned against the arm of a sofa, his smile a touch too polished. I was in the library, Inspector, Vance said. Took a call from my broker in London business matters, you know. I rejoined the others at tea around 3:30. The butler couldn't quite confirm your presence in the library, Jap said, his tone neutral but probing. Vance's smile didn't waver. Old Carter's getting on in years. Inspector, I was there, I assure you. Miss Marple tilted her head. And this call, Mr. Vance, was it of a sensitive nature? You were gone for some time. Vance's eyes narrowed. Slightly. Sensitive enough, Miss Marple. Financial dealings often are. But I wasn't near the dig site. If that's what you're implying, double quotes Mrs. Clara Vance, called next, was a bundle of nerves, her hands twisting in her lap. I was with Roland, she said quickly. Well, not the whole time, but I was in the conservatory, looking at the orchids. Then I joined him for tea. Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her question was precise. The conservatory overlooks the path to the dig site, does it not, Mrs. Vance? Did you see anyone passing by? Mrs. Vance's eyes widened, and she shook her head too quickly. No, no one. I wasn't looking out the window. Captain Hugh Ramsay, interviewed next, was brusque and to the point. I was in my room, writing letters, he said. Didn't come down until nearly 4. No one can vouch for me, but I've no reason to kill a man I barely knew. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. You are a keen observer. Captain Ramsay, did you notice anything unusual from your window? It faces the gardens, I believe. Ramsay's brow furrowed. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just Blake trudging about, and Miss Trent wandering near the roses earlier. Miss Lydia Trent, the last to be questioned, entered with a theatrical flourish, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. I was in the gardens, as I told you, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I needed inspiration for my novel. I didn't see poor Mr. Gilmore, I swear. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Inspiration is a powerful thing, Miss Trent. Did you find any near the dig site? Perhaps. Miss Trent flushed. I only glanced at it from a distance. It's so atmospheric. You know, perfect for a story. Jap closed his notebook with a snap. Right. That's everyone for now. I'll need to cross-check these alibis. Miss Marple, anything to add? Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression placid. Only that people are rarely as precise in their recollections as they believe. Inspector, a minute here, a glance there. These are the threads that unravel a mystery. As the guests dispersed, their alibis hanging in the air like fragile cobwebs, Miss Marple remained in her chair, her mind sifting through the contradictions. Dr. Harper's hesitation, Vance's slippery charm, Mrs. Vance's nervous glance, Ramsay's isolation, Miss Trent's theatrics each held a piece of the puzzle. And then there was the trowel, its worn handle and sharp blade whispering of recent use. The little gray cells were busy, and Miss Marple knew that the truth, though obscured, was beginning to take shape. Chapter 5. The red herring's atmosphere at Cranlaw Hall grew heavier as the day wore on, the weight of suspicion pressing down on the household like the gathering clouds outside. Inspector Japp had set up a makeshift office in the library, where he pored over statements and scribbled notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The guests, meanwhile, moved through the hall with forced civility, their conversations stilted and their glances wary. Miss Jane Marple, ever the quiet observer, sat in the conservatory with a cup of tea, her knitting needles clicking in a steady rhythm that belied the rapid workings of her mind. By midday, Japp had a suspect in his sights: Thomas Blake, the dour groundskeeper. The man's solitary habits, his presence at the dig site at the time of discovery, and his lack of a corroborated alibi made him an easy target. P.C. Harrow, eager to prove his worth, had uncovered a tidbit from a housemaid. Blake had been seen arguing with Mr. Gilmore the day before the murder. Something about the dig's disruption of the estate's grounds. Japp, seizing on this, summoned Blake for a second interview. Miss Marple, invited to sit in on the questioning, listened as Blake stood before Japp, his weathered hands twisting his cap. "I didn't kill him, Inspector," Blake said, his voice rough but steady. "Yes, I spoke sharp to Gilmore, told him the dig was ruining the lawns, but I'd no call to bash his head in." Japp leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You were at the dig site when you found him, Blake. No one else was seen nearby, and that argument sounds like you had a grudge." Blake's face reddened. "I'm no murderer, sir. I was checking the fences, like I said. Found him dead when I got to the trench." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Mr. Blake," she said softly, "you mentioned the lawns. Were they damaged?" "Near the eastern trench, where Mr. Gilmore was found." Blake blinked, caught off guard. Ma'am, the soil's all churned up there, worse than the other trenches. I thought it was just their digging, but it looked odd, like someone had been stamping about." "Stamping," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. "And did you notice anything else unusual? A tool out of place, perhaps, or something missing?" Blake frowned, thinking. "Now you mention it, one of the small trowels was lying near the trench, not with the other tools. I put it back myself after I found him." Japp shot Miss Marple a glance, clearly intrigued despite himself. "You're sure of that, Blake? You didn't mention it before. Didn't think it mattered." Blake mumbled. "It's just a trowel." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Everything matters, Mr. Blake. Thank you." As Blake was dismissed, Japp turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "You think he's telling the truth, don't you? Despite the evidence pointing his way." "I think, Inspector," Miss Marple said, "that Mr. Blake is a convenient scapegoat. His argument with Mr. Gilmore is too obvious, too neatly placed. In my experience, the truth is rarely so accommodating." Japp grunted, unconvinced. "Maybe, but he's got motive and opportunity. I'm keeping him under watch." Miss Marple said nothing, her gaze drifting to the window, where the dig site was just visible through the mist. The focus on Blake felt like a distraction, a red herring designed to obscure the real killer's movements. Her mind returned to the other guests, each of whom had their own secrets. She decided to take a walk through the hall, to observe and perhaps nudge the truth a little closer to the surface. In the drawing room, she found Mrs. Clara Vance alone, her hands fidgeting with a lace handkerchief. The woman started as Miss Marple entered, her eyes wide with nerves. "Oh, Miss Marple, I was just resting. This dreadful business." "Quite dreadful," Miss Marple agreed, settling into a chair with her knitting. "You seem troubled. Mrs. Vance, is it only Mr. Gilmore's death? Or is there something else weighing on you?" Mrs. Vance's lips trembled. "It's just, Roland's been so tense lately. Business troubles, you know. And now this murder, it's too much." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Business troubles," she said. "I understand. Mr. Vance has been investing in the dig. Was Mr. Gilmore involved in those arrangements?" Mrs. Vance hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. I don't know the details. Roland doesn't share such things with me. But he was talking to Mr. Gilmore about money a few days ago. I overheard them in the garden." Miss Marple nodded, her expression sympathetic but her mind alert. "And did they seem at odds?" "Not exactly," Mrs. Vance said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Mr. Gilmore sounded insistent. He said something about proof and not letting it go. I didn't hear more." Miss Marple filed this away, her thoughts turning to the scrap of paper found on Gilmore's body, the numbers that Jap had dismissed as measurements. Could they be something more? A code, perhaps, or a record of some financial discrepancy? As Mrs. Vance excused herself, Miss Marple remained in the drawing room, her mind sifting through the clues. Blake's argument, the misplaced trowel, Gilmore's conversation with Van Seach was a thread in the tapestry, but the pattern was not yet clear. The killer, she sensed, was relying on the obvious to obscure the subtle, but Miss Marple's little gray cells were attuned to the subtle. She resolved to keep watching, certain that the next clue would surface soon, as surely as the mist would lift from Cranlaw Hall. Chapter 6. A clue. In detailed afternoon at Cranlaw Hall was oppressively still, the air thick with the promise of rain. The guests, confined indoors by the looming storm and Inspector Japp's ongoing investigation, moved restlessly through the grand rooms, their polite facades fraying under the strain of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained serene, seated in the library with a cup of tea and her ever-present knitting. Her eyes, sharp as ever, followed the subtle interactions of the household, noting the way glances darted and voices hushed when certain names were mentioned. Inspector Japp, having released Thomas Blake for lack of conclusive evidence, was now focused on the physical clues from the dig site. He had sent the spade and trowel for further analysis, but the results were not yet available. Miss Marple, invited to join him in the library to discuss the case, listened as he laid out his findings. "The spade's clean, Miss Marple," Japp said, rubbing his temples. "No blood, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest it was the murder weapon. The trowel Blake mentioned is another matter. It's got a nick in the blade, fresh, like it struck something hard. Could be significant, but I'm not sure how." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "A nick, you say? Most interesting, Inspector. And where was this trowel found?" "Precisely, near the trench, a few feet from Gilmore's body," Japp replied. "Blake said he moved it back to the tool pile, but he swears it was just lying there, not buried or hidden." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the detail. "And the scrap of paper found on Mr. Gilmore? The one with numbers. Have you examined it closely?" Japp frowned, pulling the item from an evidence envelope. It was a crumpled slip of paper, no larger than a calling card, with a series of numbers scrawled in pencil. 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10. "We thought it was measurements for the dig depths or coordinates, maybe." Dr. Harper said Gilmore was always jotting such things. Miss Marple peered at the paper through her spectacles, her expression thoughtful. Measurements. Perhaps, but they are curiously precise, are they not? And written in a hurried hand, as if Mr. Gilmore were anxious to record them. Might I suggest, Inspector, that these numbers could refer to something else times, perhaps, or a code? Japp's eyebrows rose. Times? You think Gilmore was tracking someone's movements? It is possible, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. In a household like this, where everyone claims to have been elsewhere, a record of times could be most revealing. I should like to know more about Mr. Gilmore's habits. Was he, for instance, a man who kept secrets? Japp hesitated, then nodded. Dr. Harper said he was private, kept to himself, but she also mentioned he'd been agitated the last few days, muttering about proving something. She thought it was about the dig find he was excited about. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Excitement, Inspector, can mask many things. I think it would be wise to speak with Dr. Harper again, and perhaps to examine Mr. Gilmore's belongings more closely. Leaving Japp to organize a search of Gilmore's room, Miss Marple took a turn through the gardens, her shawl drawn tightly against the damp air. She paused near the dig site, now eerily silent under its cordon of rope. The eastern trench, where Gilmore had been found, was still marked by the chalk outline, and Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the surrounding earth. The soil, as Blake had noted, was churned, but not uniformly. There was a distinct patch, slightly to the left of the outline, where the dirt appeared compacted, as if pressed down deliberately. Kneeling with some difficulty, Miss Marple examined the spot more closely. Her fingers brushed the soil, and she paused, her eyes narrowing. Embedded in the dirt was a tiny fragment of metal, no larger than a pinhead, glinting faintly in the muted light. She carefully extracted it with her handkerchief and tucked it away, her mind racing. It could be nothing, a piece of debris from the dig, but her instincts told her otherwise. The trowel's nicked blade, the compacted soil, the mysterious numbers all pointed to something deliberate, something hidden. Returning to the hall, Miss Marple found Dr. Harper in the conservatory, sorting through a tray of pottery shards. The archaeologist looked up, her expression guarded. Miss Marple, she said, I hope you're not here to accuse me of anything. I've told the inspector all I know, of course. Dr. Harper, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. I only wished to ask about Mr. Gilmore's work. He was excited about a find, you said. Did he share any details with you? Dr. Harper's hands stilled on the shards. He thought we were close to something significant, a Saxon artifact, perhaps a royal relic. He was cataloging everything meticulously, but he didn't show me anything specific. He was secretive toward the end. Secretive, Miss Marple repeated softly. And did you notice him writing anything unusual? Numbers, perhaps. That didn't seem to fit with his usual measurements. Dr. Harper's eyes flicked up, a flicker of unease crossing her face. Numbers? I don't recall. He was always scribbling, but I didn't pay much mind. Miss Marple smiled, her expression benign but her mind alert. Thank you, Dr. Harper. You've been most helpful. As she left the conservatory, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. The metal fragment, the nicked trowel, the numbers on the paper, each was a clue, small but significant, pointing to a truth buried deeper than any Saxon treasure. The killer had been careful, but not careful enough. Miss Marple's little gray cells were piecing together the puzzle, and she sensed that the next revelation would bring her closer to the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The rain that had threatened all morning finally broke over Cranlaw Hall, drumming against the windows and casting the interior in a gloomy half-light. The guests, confined by the weather and the ongoing investigation, grew increasingly restless, their polite masks slipping to reveal flashes of irritation and fear. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, observed the subtle shifts in their behavior, her keen eyes noting every nervous gesture, and whispered aside. Inspector Japp had spent the morning searching Mr. Gilmore's room, uncovering little beyond a few books on Saxon history and a notebook filled with meticulous sketches of the dig site. The numbers on the scrap of paper 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 remained a mystery, though Japp was now inclined to consider Miss Marple's suggestion that they might represent times or a code. The metal fragment Miss Marple had found was sent for analysis, but results would take time. For now, the investigation seemed stalled, and the tension in the household was palpable. Miss Marple, however, was far from idle. She had taken to wandering the hall, engaging the guests in seemingly innocuous conversations that teased out fragments of truth. In the drawing room, she found Captain Hugh Ramsay polishing his pocket watch, his movements precise but his expression troubled. "A fine timepiece, Captain," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting. "You must value punctuality." Ramsay glanced up, his jaw tightening. "A habit from my military days, Miss Marple. Time matters when lives are at stake." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "And on the afternoon of Mr. Gilmore's death, you were in your room, writing letters, I believe? Did you happen to glance at your watch round 3 or 4 o'clock?" Ramsay's fingers paused on the watch. I don't recall exactly. I was preoccupied." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking softly. "Only that time is such a curious thing. It can anchor an alibi or unravel it." Ramsay's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, returning to his polishing with a touch more vigor. Miss Marple noted the slight flush in his cheeks, filing it away as she moved on to the conservatory, where Miss Lydia Trent was scribbling furiously in a notebook, her face flushed with creative fervor. "Working on your novel, Miss Trent?" Miss Marple asked, peering over her spectacles. Miss Trent started, snapping the notebook shut. "Oh, Miss Marple. Yes, I find this tragedy strangely inspiring. A murder in a grand old house, it's the perfect setting." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice kind but probing. "And you were in the gardens that afternoon, seeking inspiration. Did you notice anyone near the dig site? Mr. Gilmore, perhaps, or someone else?" Miss Trent's fingers tightened on her notebook. "I told you. I only glanced at the dig site from a distance. I saw Mr. Gilmore working, but no one else." "I swear it." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Of course, my dear. But inspiration can make one forgetful, can it not? A fleeting figure, a shadow in the roses, such things might slip the mind." Miss Trent's eyes darted away, and she mumbled something about needing to revise a chapter before hurrying off. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the closed notebook, wondering what secrets it might hold. Her next encounter was with Mr. Roland Vance, whom she found in the billiard room, idly rolling a cue ball across the table. His usual charm was tempered by a wariness that Miss Marple found telling. "Mr. Vance," she said, settling into a chair with her knitting, "you seem a man of many interests. I understand you've invested in Lord Percival's dig. Was Mr. Gilmore aware of your financial involvement?" Vance's hand stilled on the cue ball, his smile tight. Gilmore. He was just an assistant, Miss Marple. I dealt with Dr. Harper and Lord Percival. Why do you ask? Oh, only curiosity, Miss Marple said airily. Mrs. Vance mentioned overhearing you and Mr. Gilmore discussing money. He seemed quite insistent about something proof. Perhaps. Vance's smile faltered, and for a moment, his eyes were cold. Clara must have misheard. I barely spoke. To Gilmore. My investments are private, Miss Marple, and I'd thank you to keep your nose out of them. Miss Marple inclined her head, unruffled. Of course, Mr. Vance. I am only an old woman, after all, with too much time to think. As Vance strode out, Miss Marple's mind turned over his reaction. The lies were surfacing now, like bubbles in a pond small, but betraying something deeper. Gilmore's insistence on proof, the numbers on his paper, the nicked trowel, and now the guarded responses of Ramsay, Trent, and Vance all pointed to a web of secrets. She recalled Mrs. Vance's nervous glance toward Captain Ramsay during tea, and a new thread emerged. Could there be a connection between them? Something Gilmore had stumbled upon? Returning to the library, Miss Marple found Japp examining a map of the dig site. Any progress? Miss Marple, he asked, his tone weary. Progress, Inspector, comes in small steps, she said. I believe Mr. Gilmore knew something dangerous. Those numbers, the trowel, the disturbed earth, they are not random. We must look closer at the relationships in this house. Secrets, like lies, have a way of betraying themselves. Japp nodded, though his expression was skeptical. I'll keep digging, Miss Marple, but I hope your little gray cells are onto something, because I'm running out of leads. Miss Marple smiled, her needles resuming their rhythm. The lies were surfacing, and with them, the shape of the truth was beginning to emerge. She needed only one more piece of gesture, a word, a slip to bring it into focus. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. Rain had settled into a steady drizzle, cloaking Cranlaw Hall in a damp melancholy that mirrored the growing unease among its inhabitants. The guests, now several days into the investigation, were fraying at the edges, their nerves strained by Inspector Japp's relentless questioning and the oppressive weight of suspicion. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained a calm presence, her knitting a constant companion as she moved through the house, her gentle inquiries cutting through the fog of deceit like a quiet blade. By late afternoon, a new development had stirred the household. Inspector Japp had received the analysis of the trowel found near the trench. The nick in its blade contained microscopic traces of a metallic alloy, not unlike the fragment Miss Marple had discovered in the compacted soil. This suggested the trowel had struck something hard, possibly an artifact, or perhaps the murder weapon itself. The numbers on Gilmore's scrap of paper, 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10, were still a puzzle. But Japp now suspected they might relate to the dig's cataloging system or a hidden transaction. The investigation was closing in, and the pressure was mounting. Miss Marple, sensing the moment was ripe for a breakthrough, chose to focus her attention on Mrs. Clara Vance, whose nervous demeanor had grown more pronounced. She found the woman in the conservatory, staring blankly at a wilting orchid, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled handkerchief. Mrs. Vance, Miss Marple said softly, settling beside her with her knitting, you seem quite distressed. Is there something you wish to share? It can be a great relief to unburden oneself. Mrs. Vance's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she seemed on the verge of collapse. Oh, Miss Marple, she whispered, her voice breaking, I can't bear it any longer. This dreadful business, it's tearing me apart. Miss Marple's needles slowed, her gaze kind but piercing. What is it, my dear? Something about Mr. Gilmore, perhaps, or something closer to home. Mrs. Vance's breath hitched, and she glanced around, as if fearing eavesdroppers. It's Roland, she said, her voice barely audible. He's been so secretive, so angry. I overheard him and Mr. Gilmore arguing 2 days before it happened. It was about money, something about the digs funding. Mr. Gilmore said he'd found proof of something, and Roland told him to keep quiet or he'd regret it. Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was racing. Proof, she murmured. Did Mr. Gilmore say what this proof was? Mrs. Vance shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, but it frightened me. Roland's been desperate lately. His investments haven't been going well. I think he might have done something terrible to protect himself. Miss Marple reached out, patting Mrs. Vance's hand gently. You've done well to tell me, my dear. But tell me, was there anyone else involved in this conversation? Or perhaps someone you saw near the dig site that afternoon? Mrs. Vance hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door. I saw Captain Ramsay near the gardens, just before tea. He was coming from the direction of the dig site, looking agitated. I didn't think much of it then. But now, Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. Thank you, Mrs. Vance. You've been most helpful. Try to rest now, things will become clearer soon. As Mrs. Vance dabbed at her eyes and hurried away, Miss Marple sat back, her mind sifting through this new revelation. Roland Vance's argument with Gilmore, the mention of proof, and now Captain Ramsay's presence near the dig site. The threads were tightening, forming a pattern that pointed to a motive rooted in financial desperation or a hidden scandal. But Mrs. Vance's confession, though emotional, felt incomplete, as if she were still holding something back, seeking to test another thread. Miss Marple made her way to the drawing room, where she found Miss Lydia Trent scribbling in her notebook, her face pale but her eyes bright with nervous energy. Miss Trent, Miss Marple said, settling nearby, your novel must be progressing splendidly. Have you found any new inspiration in recent events? Miss Trent's pen froze, and she looked up, her expression guarded. It's coming along, Miss Marple. But this murder, it's too real, too horrible. I can't stop thinking about poor Mr. Gilmore. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic. You were near the dig site that afternoon, seeking inspiration. Did you happen to see Captain Ramsay, perhaps, or anyone else who seemed out of place? Miss Trent's fingers tightened on her pen, and for a moment, she seemed to struggle with her response. I might have seen the captain, she admitted, her voice low. He was walking quickly, coming from the dig site. I thought he was just taking a stroll, but he looked upset. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Upset, you say? How curious. And did you notice anything else, perhaps something Mr. Gilmore was working on? Something that might have drawn attention? Miss Trent's gaze dropped to her notebook. I don't know what you mean, Miss Marple. I only glanced at the dig site. Mr. Gilmore was digging, as always. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking softly. Of course, my dear. Inspiration is a fleeting thing, is it not? As Miss Trent excused herself, Miss Marple remained in the drawing room, her thoughts swirling. Mrs. Vance's confession and Miss Trent's reluctant admission had cracked open a door, revealing glimpses of motive and opportunity. Roland Vance's financial troubles, Captain Ramsay's agitation, And Gilmore's mysterious proof were pieces of a puzzle that was growing ever clearer. The emotional turning point had come, and Miss Marple knew the time was approaching to tighten the net around the truth. Chapter 9. The trapped rain had ceased, leaving Cranlaw Hall enveloped in a damp hush, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and roses. The guests, now weary from days of scrutiny, moved through the house with the caution of those who sensed a trap closing around them. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting tucked neatly in her basket, had decided the time was ripe to apply a touch of psychological pressure. The threads of the mystery Roland Vance's financial secrets, Captain Ramsay's agitation, Miss Trent's evasions, and the enigmatic numbers on Gilmore's paper were weaving together, and Miss Marple intended to tighten the weave. She proposed to Inspector Japp that he gather the guests in the drawing room that evening, ostensibly to update them on the investigation. Japp, though skeptical of her methods, agreed, sensing her quiet confidence. "You've got something up your sleeve, Miss Marple," he said, his mustache twitching. "I hope it shakes loose the truth." "It will, Inspector," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. "The truth is like a nervous guest, it reveals itself when pressed." At 8 o'clock, the drawing room was filled with the uneasy rustle of silk and the clink of teacups, as Lady Beatrice played hostess despite her strained composure. Lord Percival stood by the fireplace, his face etched with worry. Dr. Evelyn Harper sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Roland Vance lounged with forced ease, his wife Clara trembling beside him. Captain Ramsay stood near the window, his posture stiff, while Miss Lydia Trent clutched her notebook, her eyes darting nervously. Thomas Blake, the groundskeeper, hovered at the edge of the group, his cap in hand. Japp began, his voice brisk. "I've called you here to review the facts. Mr. Gilmore was murdered between 3 and 4 on Tuesday, struck from behind with a heavy object. We've ruled out the spade, but a trowel found near the trench has a nick containing traces of metal, possibly from an artifact or the murder weapon. We also have a scrap of paper with numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10. They may be times, measurements, or a code. I want each of you to think carefully. Did you see anything, or anyone, near the dig site that afternoon?" A murmur rippled through the room, but no one spoke. Miss Marple, seated quietly with her hands folded, chose this moment to intervene. "If I may, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but commanding attention. "It is curious, is it not? How many of you were near the dig site that day?" "Mr. Vance, you were on a telephone call, but the library windows overlooked the path to the trenches. Captain Ramsay, you were seen coming from that direction, looking agitated. Miss Trent, you admitted to glancing at the dig site for inspiration. And Dr. Harper, you left Mr. Gilmore alone just before 3. Yet no one saw anything unusual." The guests shifted uncomfortably. Roland Vance's smile was tight. "I've told you, Miss Marple, I was in the library. I didn't see Gilmore or anyone else." Captain Ramsay's voice was gruff. "I took a walk in the gardens. Didn't go near the trenches. Whoever saw me must be mistaken." Miss Trent's voice trembled. "I only looked from a distance. I didn't see anything suspicious." Dr. Harper's eyes flashed. "I've said all I know. Arthur was alive when I left him." Miss Marple's gaze moved to Mrs. Vance, whose hands twisted her handkerchief into knots. "Mrs. Vance," she said gently, "you mentioned overhearing your husband and Mr. Gilmore discussing money, something about proof. Could that proof have been related to the dig? Perhaps an artifact of value?" Mrs. Vance's face paled, and she glanced at her husband, who shot her a warning look. I don't know, she stammered. I only heard bits of it. Miss Marple nodded, undeterred. And Captain Ramsay, you are a man of precision. With your fine pocket watch, did you check the time when you were in the gardens? Perhaps at 3:15? Or 4:20? Ramsay's jaw clenched. I don't recall. I wasn't timing my walk. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. How curious. Those numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 seem so specific. They could be times, could they not? Times when someone was seen, or something was done. Mr. Gilmore was meticulous, Dr. Harper said. Perhaps he was noting the movements of someone he suspected. A tense silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lord Percival cleared his throat. Miss Marple, are you suggesting one of us is lying? Not suggesting, Lord Percival, Miss Marple said, her voice calm but incisive. I am observing. A man is dead, and someone in this room knows more than they have said. A trowel with a nicked blade, a scrap of paper with cryptic numbers, a patch of compacted earth. These are not accidents. They are clues, and they point to a truth that cannot remain hidden. Miss Trent let out a small gasp, her notebook slipping to the floor. Captain Ramsay's hand tightened on his watch. Roland Vance's smile vanished, and Mrs. Vance stifled a sob. Dr. Harper's face was a mask of defiance, while Lady Beatrice looked to her husband, her eyes wide with fear. Jap, sensing the moment, stepped forward. If anyone has something to say, now's the time. Miss Marple's right, secrets don't stay buried forever. No one spoke, but the air was thick with unspoken truths. Miss Marple leaned back, her expression serene but her mind alert. She had set the trap, and the guests' reactions had revealed their cracks. The killer was among them, and the pressure was beginning to tell. One more push, she thought, and the truth would tumble out like a loosened stone. Chapter 10. The revealed drawing room at Cranlaw Hall was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows and the occasional crackle of the fire. The guests sat in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of unease, as Inspector Japp stood before them, his notebook in hand. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting set aside for the moment, occupied her usual corner chair, her serene demeanor masking the sharp calculations of her little gray cells. The trap she had set the previous evening had stirred the pot, and now, she sensed, the moment had come to unveil the truth. Japp cleared his throat, his voice steady but charged with authority. We've gathered you here again because new evidence has come to light. The trowel found near Mr. Gilmore's body, the numbers on his paper, and the metal fragment Miss Marple discovered, they all point to a deliberate act. Someone in this room killed Arthur Gilmore, and it's time to lay the facts bare. The guests shifted, their eyes darting to one another. Roland Vance's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair, while Mrs. Vance's handkerchief was now a twisted wreck. Captain Ramsay stood rigid, his jaw set, and Miss Lydia Trent clutched her notebook as if it were a shield. Dr. Evelyn Harper's expression was defiant, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Lord Percival and Lady Beatrice exchanged a glance, their worry palpable, while Thomas Blake stood at the back, his face unreadable. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but commanding attention. If I may, Inspector, I believe I can clarify the matter. Mr. Gilmore's death was no accident, nor was it a crime of passion. It was a calculated act, driven by a secret he had uncovered, a secret someone was desperate to keep buried. She paused, letting her words settle over the room like a fine dust. Let us begin with the clues. The trowel, with its nicked blade and traces of metal, was not the murder weapon, but it struck something significant, an artifact, perhaps, or a tool used in the crime. The compacted earth near the trench suggests something was buried or hidden there, and the numbers on Mr. Gilmore's paper 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 were not measurements, but times, recording moments when he observed something suspicious. Dr. Harper's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. That's speculation, Miss Marple. Arthur was cataloging the dig. Nothing more. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Was he, Dr. Harper? Or was he cataloging something else, something you did not wish him to reveal? You said he was secretive, excited about a find, but I suspect he had found proof of a different kind, proof of fraud. A gasp rippled through the room. Roland Vance sat up straighter, his face pale. Fraud? That's absurd. I've done nothing wrong. Miss Marple turned to him, her gaze steady. Mr. Vance, you invested heavily in the dig, did you not? But your finances, as Mrs. Vance hinted, have been troubled. Mr. Gilmore overheard you discussing a plan to inflate the value of the dig's finds, perhaps by planting a forged artifact, a Saxon treasure, to attract more investors. He confronted you, threatening to expose the scheme. That is the proof Mrs. Vance overheard him mention. Mrs. Vance let out a choked sob, her eyes fixed on her husband. Vance's jaw worked, but he said nothing, his silence damning. Miss Marple continued, her voice measured. But you were not alone, Mr. Vance. Captain Ramsay, you were seen near the dig site at 3:15, looking agitated. You have a military pension, but it is modest, and you have debts Mr. Vance promised to clear if you helped him. You were to plant the forged artifact, but Mr. Gilmore caught you in the act. Ramsay's face flushed, his hands clenching. That's a lie. I was in the gardens, not the trenches. Were you? Miss Marple said softly. Miss Trent saw you coming from the dig site, and her notebook, which I glimpsed this morning, contains a description of a man hurrying from the shadows at precisely 3:15. She thought it was inspiration for her novel, but it was fact, not fiction. Miss Trent's eyes widened, her notebook slipping from her grasp. I didn't mean to. Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing her. You meant no harm, my dear, but your observation was crucial. Now, let us consider the trowel. Its nick and the metal fragment suggest it struck something, perhaps a forged artifact, hastily buried to hide it. Mr. Gilmore, realizing the fraud, recorded the times he saw you, Mr. Vance, and Captain Ramsay near the trench. At 4:20, he confronted one of you, and that confrontation led to his death. Japp stepped forward, his eyes sharp. Who struck the blow? Miss Marple. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Captain Ramsay. Captain Ramsay, you are a man of action, trained to act decisively. When Mr. Gilmore threatened to expose the fraud, you saw your chance slipping away, your debts, your future. You struck him with a heavy object, perhaps a stone from the dig, and left the trowel nearby to mislead us. The spade was clean, but the trowel's nick tells the story of your attempt to bury the evidence. Ramsay's face contorted, and he lunged forward, his voice hoarse. You've no proof. It's all conjecture. Japp moved swiftly, signaling PC Harrow to stand ready. We'll search the trench again, Captain, he said. If there's a forged artifact buried there, we'll find it. And your debts, Vance's. Bank records will confirm the payments. Mrs. Vance broke into sobs, and Vance slumped in his chair, his charm shattered. Ramsay's shoulders sagged, his defiance crumbling. I didn't mean to kill him, he muttered. He wouldn't let it go, said he'd ruin us all. Miss Marple leaned back, her expression calm. The truth, Captain, always finds its way out. The little gray cells merely hasten its rival. As Jap led Ramsay away, the room erupted in murmurs, the tension breaking like the storm outside. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her work done, the tapestry of deceit unraveled at last. Chapter 11. The reflection Thay rain had cleared, leaving the gardens of Cranlaw Hall glistening under a tentative sun. The household, shaken by Captain Ramsay's confession and arrest, moved in a daze, as if waking from a troubling dream. The drawing room, so recently charged with tension, now felt hollow, its grandeur muted by the aftermath of truth. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly by the window, her knitting resumed, the soft click of her needles a counterpoint to the murmurs of the remaining guests. Inspector Japp, his task nearly complete, joined her, his notebook tucked away, and a weary satisfaction in his eyes. "Well, Miss Marple," Japp said, settling into a chair beside her, "you've done it again. Ramsay's in custody, and we've found the forged artifact, a crude Saxon brooch, buried just where you said, in that patch of compacted earth. Vance is talking now, admitting his part in the scheme. It's a tidy wrap-up, thanks to you." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her eyes fixed on her knitting. "You are too kind, Inspector. I merely observed what was there to see. The little gray cells, as you know, have a way of noticing the small things, the inconsistencies, the hesitations that betray the truth." Japp chuckled, shaking his head. "Small things, indeed. That trowel, those numbers, Mrs. Vance's nerves, you saw what we all missed. But tell me, how did you know it was Ramsay and not Vance who struck the blow?" Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked out at the gardens, where the dig site was now silent, its secrets unearthed. "Mr. Vance, Inspector, is a man of words and schemes, not action. His role was to orchestrate the fraud, to charm and manipulate. But Captain Ramsay, with his military precision and desperate debts, was the one who acted when Mr. Gilmore threatened to expose them. The numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 were Mr. Gilmore's record of their movements. You see, at 3:15, Ramsay was seen near the trench, likely planting the artifact. At 4:20, he returned to silence Gilmore's accusations. The 7:10, I suspect, was when Gilmore planned to confront them both, perhaps after finding the forged brooch. Japp nodded, impressed. "And the trowel, that nick in the blade, a small but telling detail," Miss Marple said. "It struck the forged brooch, perhaps as Ramsay buried it in haste. The metal fragment I found confirmed it an alloy not native to a Saxon relic. Mr. Gilmore, meticulous as he was, noticed the discrepancy and began to suspect fraud. His insistence on proof sealed his fate." Japp leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "It's a grim business, Miss Marple. All this for a bit of money and a fake treasure. Makes you wonder about people, doesn't it?" Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "People, Inspector, are capable of great good and great folly. It is not the money itself, but the fear and greed it awakens, that leads to such acts. In my village, I have seen it many times, a small deception, a hidden shame, spiraling into tragedy. But there is always a pattern, if one looks closely enough." Lady Beatrice approached, her face pale but composed. "Miss Marple, I don't know how to thank you. This dreadful affair, it's shaken us all, but you've brought clarity. I only wish it hadn't come to this." Miss Marple reached out, patting Lady Beatrice's hand. "My dear, The truth is never easy, but it is necessary. Your home will heal, in time, as all wounds do. As Lady Beatrice returned to her guests, Japp stood, adjusting his coat. I'll be off to file my report, Miss Marple. Scotland Yard will want the details. Will you stay on at the hall? Miss Marple shook her head, folding her knitting neatly. I think, Inspector, I shall return to St. Mary Mead. The country air has been most invigorating, but my garden calls, and there are always new patterns to unravel, even in a quiet village. Japp smiled, tipping his hat. You're a marvel, Miss Marple, until the next mystery. Then, as he departed, Miss Marple gazed out at the gardens, her mind already drifting to the familiar lanes of her village. The case at Cranlaw Hall had been a puzzle of human nature, greed, fear, and desperation woven into a deadly tapestry. But she had unpicked the threads, as she always did, with patience and precision. With a final glance at the now peaceful dig site, she gathered her things, ready to leave the grand estate and its secrets behind. Her little gray cells ever ready for the next challenge. Chapter 12. The unsettled dust sun hung low over Cranlaw Hall, casting long shadows across the lawns as the household began to settle. In the wake of Captain Ramsay's arrest, the guests, though relieved that the murderer had been identified, remained uneasy, their conversations hushed and their movements cautious. The revelation of the forged artifact and the financial scheme had left a stain on the estate's grandeur, and whispers of scandal lingered like the damp air after the rain. Miss Jane Marple, however, was not entirely convinced that every thread of the mystery had been unraveled. Her little gray cells, ever vigilant, sensed a faint discord in the pattern. Seated in the morning room with a cup of tea, her knitting resting in her lap, Miss Marple observed the comings and goings of the household. Inspector Japp had departed for London to finalize his report, leaving P.C. Harrow to tie up loose ends. The guests were preparing to leave, their bags packed and their farewells strained. Yet Miss Marple's attention was drawn to Miss Lydia Trent, whose nervous energy seemed undiminished. Her notebook clutched tightly as she hovered near the terrace doors. Approaching the young novelist with her usual gentle demeanor, Miss Marple said, Miss Trent, you seem restless. Is your novel progressing, or does something else trouble you? Miss Trent started, her eyes flickering with unease. Oh, Miss Marple, it's nothing, really. Just the shock of it all. I thought I'd find inspiration here, but it's been far too real. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her voice was probing. Real, indeed. Your notebook must be full of observations. I noticed you wrote something about a shadow in the roses at 3:15, which helped us identify Captain Ramsay. But I wonder, my dear, if you saw anything else, something you haven't shared? Miss Trent's fingers tightened on her notebook, and she glanced toward the gardens. I don't know what you mean. I told you everything I saw. Did you? Miss Marple said, her tone mild but insistent. In my experience, writers notice more than they realize. A gesture, a glance, a detail overlooked in the moment, such things can be significant. Miss Trent hesitated, then opened her notebook, her hands trembling slightly. There was something else, she admitted, her voice low. I didn't think it mattered, but at 4:20, just before Mr. Blake found the body, I saw Dr. Harper near the dig site. She was standing by the trench, looking down, as if she were checking something. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Checking something, she repeated. How curious. And you didn't mention this to Inspector Japp? Miss Trent flushed. I didn't want to cause trouble. Dr. Harper's been so kind to me, encouraging my writing. I thought it was nothing, just her overseeing the dig. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Dr. Harper's presence at 420, so close to the time of Gilmore's death, was a new thread, one that did not quite fit with Ramsay's confession. She thanked Miss Trent and made her way to the conservatory, where Dr. Evelyn Harper was packing her archaeological tools. Her movements brisk but her expression guarded. "Dr. Harper," Miss Marple said, settling nearby with her knitting, "you've been most cooperative with the investigation, but I wonder if there's something you've overlooked. Miss Trent mentioned seeing you near the trench at 420, just before Mr. Gilmore was found. Were you checking on his work? Perhaps." Dr. Harper's hands froze, and she turned, her eyes narrowing. "Miss Trent must be mistaken, Miss Marple. I was on the terrace by then. As I told the inspector, I left Arthur at 3. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Of course. But it is strange, is it not, how memories differ? Mr. Gilmore's numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 seem to point to specific moments. If you were at the trench at 420, perhaps you saw something or someone that could clarify things." Dr. Harper's face hardened, but a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. "I wasn't there," she said firmly. "Miss Trent's imagination is running away with her. She's a novelist, after all." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "Imagination can be a powerful thing, Dr. Harper. But so is the truth. If you were at the trench, it might explain why Mr. Gilmore's notes were so urgent. Perhaps he suspected more than just a forged artifact. Perhaps he suspected someone else was involved." Dr. Harper turned away, her hands resuming their packing with forced calm. "You're fishing, Miss Marple. I have nothing more to say." Miss Marple watched her go, her mind sifting through the new information. Dr. Harper's denial, coupled with Miss Trent's observation, suggested a hidden layer to the crime. Ramsay's confession had tied up the murder neatly, but the timing of Dr. Harper's presence raised questions. Had she been complicit in the fraud, or was she protecting another secret? The numbers, the trowel, the compacted earth all pointed to a conspiracy broader than Ramsay and Vance alone. Returning to the morning room, Miss Marple sat quietly, her knitting untouched as she pondered. The case was not yet closed, she felt certain. There was another piece to the puzzle, a shadow in the background that had yet to step into the light. Her little gray cells were humming, and she resolved to watch Dr. Harper closely, certain that the final thread of the mystery was within reach. Chapter 13. The hidden thread. The morning at Cranlaw Hall was crisp and clear, the sunlight filtering through the trees and casting dappled patterns across the lawns. The guests, though still shaken by Captain Ramsay's arrest and the unraveling of the fraudulent scheme, were beginning to reclaim a semblance of normalcy. Suitcases were packed, and farewells were murmured, but an undercurrent of unease lingered, as if the house itself held its breath. Miss Jane Marple, seated on the terrace with her knitting, observed the comings and goings with her usual quiet vigilance, her little gray cells buzzing with the suspicion that the mystery was not yet fully resolved. Dr. Evelyn Harper's presence near the dig site at 420, as reported by Miss Lydia Trent, had planted a seed of doubt in Miss Marple's mind. Captain Ramsay's confession, while compelling, did not account for Dr. Harper's actions, nor did it fully explain the cryptic numbers on Mr. Gilmore's paper. 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10. The trowel's nicked blade and the metal fragment suggested a physical act, but Miss Marple sensed a deeper motive, one tied to the dig itself and the secrets it held. She resolved to probe further, starting with a closer look at Dr. Harper's roll. Finding Dr. Harper in the library, sorting through a stack of archaeological notes, Miss Marple approached with her characteristic gentleness. "Dr. Harper," she said, settling into a chair with her knitting, "you must be eager to resume your work on the dig, now that the investigation is nearing its close. Mr. Gilmore's loss must be keenly felt." Dr. Harper's hands paused on the papers, her expression guarded. "It is, Miss Marple. Arthur was a brilliant assistant. His death has set us back considerably." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Indeed. He was meticulous, you said. I wonder, did he ever share concerns about the dig's integrity? Perhaps about the artifacts themselves?" Dr. Harper's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained steady. "He was excited about a potential find, a Saxon brooch or dagger. He never mentioned doubts about their authenticity." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, only curiosity," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "Miss Trent saw you near the trench at 4:20, just before Mr. Gilmore was found. It struck me as odd, since you said you were on the terrace by then. Could you have returned to check on something, perhaps something Mr. Gilmore had discovered?" Dr. Harper's face tightened, and for a moment she seemed to weigh her response. "Miss Trent is mistaken," she said finally. "I was not at the trench. My work was done for the day." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Dr. Harper's hands, which betrayed a slight tremor. "Of course. But it is curious, is it not, how Mr. Gilmore's numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 seemed to align with moments of activity at the dig site? I wonder if he was tracking more than just Captain Ramsay and Mr. Vance. Perhaps he suspected someone else was tampering with the finds." Dr. Harper's lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned back to her papers. "You're seeing patterns where there are none, Miss Marple. I have work to do." Undeterred, Miss Marple made her way to the dig site, where P.C. Harrow was overseeing the removal of the cordon. The trench, still marked by the chalk outline of Gilmore's body, drew her attention. She crouched carefully, her eyes scanning the soil. The compacted patch she had noted earlier was undisturbed, but nearby, a small irregularity caught her eye, a faint depression, as if something had been pressed into the earth and then removed. Using her handkerchief, she gently probed the spot and uncovered a tiny shard of pottery, its edge unnaturally smooth, as if recently broken. Tucking the shard away, Miss Marple returned to the hall, her mind racing. The shard, the trowel's nick. Dr. Harper's evasiveness all pointed to a second layer of deception. She sought out Lady Beatrice, who was in the drawing room, arranging flowers with a distracted air. "Beatrice, my dear," Miss Marple said, "you mentioned Lord Percival's enthusiasm for the dig. Did he ever discuss its funding with you, or any concerns about the artifacts?" Lady Beatrice's hands faltered on a rose stem. "Percival was thrilled about the dig," she said. "He trusted Dr. Harper completely. But he did mention once that Mr. Gilmore seemed troubled, as if he doubted the project's integrity. Percival brushed it off as scholarly nerves." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Did he, now? And Dr. Harper, has she been entirely forthcoming with him?" Lady Beatrice hesitated, her voice dropping. I overheard her speaking to Percival about the brooch before Arthur's death. She said it could be a major find, but her tone was odd, almost cautious. I thought it was just her usual precision." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions crystallizing. Dr. Harper's presence at the trench, the pottery shard, Gilmore's numbers, they suggested she was not merely a bystander but an active participant in the dig's secrets. Had she known of the forged artifact and sought to protect her reputation? Or was there another motive, perhaps a rival find she wished to claim? The little gray cells were piecing together a new pattern, one that implicated Dr. Harper in a way Miss Marple had not anticipated. She resolved to confront her once more, certain that the final thread was close to being pulled free. Chapter 14. The second trap. Late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Cranlaw Hall, casting a golden glow over the drawing room where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. The household was quieter now, the guests' departures imminent, but the air remained thick with unresolved tension. Captain Ramsay's confession and the exposure of the forged artifact had settled part of the mystery, but Miss Marple's little gray cells were still at work, tugging at a persistent thread. Dr. Evelyn Harper's presence at the trench at 420, the pottery shard, and the cryptic numbers on Mr. Gilmore's paper. These clues suggested a deeper layer to the crime, one that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She had requested another gathering of the remaining guests, a suggestion Inspector Japp, now back from London, had reluctantly agreed to, sensing her certainty that something remained amiss. "You're like a terrier with a bone, Miss Marple," he'd said, half exasperated, half admiring. "If you think there's more to this, I'll trust your instincts." At 6 o'clock, the drawing room was once again filled with the uneasy murmur of voices. Lord Percival and Lady Beatrice sat close together, their faces etched with fatigue. Dr. Harper stood near the fireplace, her posture rigid, her eyes wary. Roland Vance, though subdued after his role in the fraud was exposed, maintained a veneer of composure, while Mrs. Vance fidgeted beside him. Miss Lydia Trent, her notebook absent for once, looked pale and nervous. Thomas Blake stood at the back, his expression guarded. Japp began, his tone brisk. "We've made an arrest, and the case seems closed, but Miss Marple has reason to believe we've missed something. I'll let her explain." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her voice calm but carrying a quiet authority. "Thank you, Inspector. Captain Ramsay's confession and Mr. Vance's involvement in the forged artifact explain much, but not all. Mr. Gilmore's death was no simple act of desperation. There is another layer to this mystery, one that centers on the dig itself and the secrets it holds." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, lingering on Dr. Harper. "Dr. Harper, you told us you left Mr. Gilmore at the trench at 3 o'clock, joining the others for tea. Yet Miss Trent saw you there at 4:20, just before the body was found. Why did you return?" Dr. Harper's face stiffened, her voice sharp. "I've said it before, Miss Marple. Miss Trent is mistaken. I was on the terrace. I had no reason to return to the trench." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "No reason, perhaps, but Mr. Gilmore was a meticulous man, and his notes, those numbers, 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10, suggest he was tracking something, or someone. I found a pottery shard near the trench, its edge unnaturally smooth, as if deliberately broken. Could it be, Dr. Harper, that you were protecting a find of your own, a genuine artifact, perhaps, that you wished to claim without Mr. Gilmore's interference?" A murmur ran through the room. Dr. Harper's hands clenched, her eyes flashing. "That's preposterous. I'm an archaeologist, not a thief. Arthur was my assistant, not my rival." Miss Marple's voice remained gentle but unrelenting. "Yet you were cautious when speaking of the dig's finds, even to Lord Percival. Lady Beatrice overheard you discussing a brooch, your tone guarded. I believe Mr. Gilmore discovered a genuine artifact, a valuable one, and you saw an opportunity to secure your reputation. When he refused to stay silent, perhaps threatening to reveal your plan. You acted to protect your discovery. Lord Percival's face paled. Evelyn, is this true? Did you harm Arthur? Dr. Harper's composure cracked, her voice rising. No, I didn't kill him. Yes, I found a sharded fragment of a rare Saxon vessel in the trench that morning. I wanted to verify it before announcing it. Arthur was excited, but he was too eager to share it. I asked him to wait, but I didn't kill him. Miss Marple tilted her head. Then why were you at the trench at 4:20? Miss Trent's observation is clear, and Mr. Gilmore's numbers place you there. Were you checking the shard, or ensuring it remained hidden? Dr. Harper's shoulders slumped, her defiance giving way to exhaustion. I went back to the trench, she admitted, her voice barely audible. At 4:20. I wanted to retrieve the shard before anyone else saw it. I saw Arthur lying there, already dead. I panicked and left. I didn't touch him, I swear. Jap's eyes narrowed. Why didn't you report this, Dr. Harper? That's withholding evidence. I was afraid. Dr. Harper said, her voice breaking. I thought it would look like I'd done it. I only wanted to protect my find. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. And so you left the trowel, perhaps after using it to rebury the shard. Its blade nicking the pottery in your haste. But your silence allowed Captain Ramsay to take the blame. While you hid your own secret, the room was silent, the weight of Dr. Harper's admission settling over the guests. Jap stepped forward, his voice firm. We'll need to verify this, Dr. Harper. If that shard is in the trench, it'll confirm your story and your actions. As PC Harrow escorted Dr. Harper to assist in the search, Miss Marple leaned back, her mind satisfied but somber. The second trap had revealed not a killer, but a conspirator in silence, driven by ambition. The mystery was nearly complete, but one final piece remained: confirmation of the shard's existence, and with it, the full truth of Mr. Gilmore's tragic end. Chapter 15. The final thread. The morning sun bathed Cranlaw Hall in a soft, forgiving light, as if seeking to cleanse the estate of its recent shadows. The dig site, once a hive of activity and secrets, was now silent, its trenches cordoned off and its artifacts secured for proper examination. The guests had all but departed, their farewells tinged with relief and lingering unease. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting packed away in her small valise, stood on the terrace, gazing out at the gardens where the drama had unfolded. Her work at Cranlaw Hall was nearly done, but one final thread remained to be tied. Inspector Japp, having overseen the recovery of the pottery shard Dr. Evelyn Harper had admitted to hiding, joined Miss Marple on the terrace, his expression a mix of satisfaction and fatigue. It's all wrapped up, Miss Marple, he said, tipping his hat. The shard was exactly where Dr. Harper said, buried in the trench. It's a genuine Saxon piece, likely part of a ceremonial vessel. She's not facing murder charges, but withholding evidence and tampering with the scene will cost her dearly. Her reputation. For starters, Miss Marple nodded, her eyes tracing the outline of the dig site. A heavy price, Inspector, but ambition can blind even the most learned. Dr. Harper's desire to claim the find led her to silence, and that silence nearly obscured the truth. Japp chuckled, shaking his head. You saw it all, didn't you? Ramsay's desperation, Vance's scheming, Harper's secrecy, even Miss Trent's scribbles. Those numbers 3 to 15, 4 to 20, 7 to 10 were the key, weren't they? Indeed, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but precise. Mr. Gilmore was a meticulous man, and his notes were his attempt to protect the truth. At 3:15, he saw Captain Ramsay planting the forged brooch. At 4:20, he confronted him, unaware that Dr. Harper was also there, guarding her own secret. The 7:10, I believe, was when he intended to reveal his suspicions to Lord Percival. But he never had the chance. The trowel's nick, the metal fragment, the compacted earth, all were signs of a struggle, not just to hide a fraud, but to protect ambitions and debts. Jap's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. And Mrs. Vance, she nearly threw us off with her nerves. But her confession about the argument pointed us to Vance's scheme. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. Mrs. Vance was frightened, but honest. In her fear, it is often the quiet ones, Inspector, who see the most, even if they do not understand it at first. Miss Trent, too, with her novelist's eye, captured details she scarcely knew were vital. Lady Beatrice approached, her face weary but grateful. Jane, I cannot thank you enough. You've saved us from a greater scandal, though I fear the hall will never feel quite the same. Miss Marple patted her friend's hand. My dear Beatrice, houses, like people, recover in time. The truth, though painful, brings clarity. Your dig may yet yield wonders, but let them be honest ones. Lady Beatrice smiled, her eyes misty. You must come back, Jane. When all this is behind us, the roses will bloom again, and I'd love your company without a murder to solve. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I shall, Beatrice, though I suspect my little village of St. Mary Mead will keep me busy. Human nature, you see, is the same everywhere, full of secrets, waiting to be unraveled. As Lady Beatrice returned to the house, Jap offered Miss Marple a lift to the station. Back to your quiet life, eh? Though I wager it's never as quiet as you make out. Miss Marple smiled, gathering her valise. Quiet, Inspector, is a matter of perspective. The little gray cells find puzzles even in the smallest places. As the car pulled away from Cranlaw Hall, Miss Marple gazed out at the rolling Dorset countryside, her mind already drifting to the familiar lanes of St. Mary Mead. The mystery of the deadly dig was solved, its threads fraud, ambition, and desperation neatly woven into a coherent tapestry. Yet she knew that new patterns would emerge, as they always did, in the intricate dance of human nature. With a contented sigh, she leaned back, ready for whatever puzzle awaited her next.